So Showalter was arrested, and all 17 men of his party were held briefly at Camp Wright while they were interrogated. Now, here we have a photo of Holcomb Valley, which was a haven for organized and unorganized militiamen who favored the Confederacy. The Knights of the Golden Circle was absolutely active in this area, and they were holding militia training in the mountains of San Bernardino. This particular valley that we see here, this is Holcomb Valley. If any of you folks have participated in the Boy Scouts in Southern California, then you might have camped at Holcomb Valley. It's no longer open as a scout camp now. Somebody else owns that property. But scouting is how I became familiar with Holcomb Valley. And the entire time that I was camping there, I had no idea that Confederate insurgents, or excuse me, pro-Confederate insurgents, were holding militia training so that people could have some type of military training before they go fight for the Confederacy. And that's absolutely incredible. The gentleman photographed here is Grizzly Bill Holcomb, and he was the owner of that land. He was a prospector. He had himself a few acres of land in that particular neck of the woods. He happened to strike gold, and then that gave birth to the boom town of Belleville, which was one of those overnight gold rush boom towns that was very heavily populated for some time. It was actually slightly more populated than San Bernardino, and Belleville up in the mountains almost became the county seat of San Bernardino County until the war between the states started. So he owned this claim, and he turned a blind eye while the Knights of the Golden Circle were hosting militia training, and also while this reverse underground railroad of people who were going back east to fight for the Confederacy, he gave them all a blind eye. So Dan Showalter from Mariposa County, he stayed here for some time, and Ben Harris from Mariposa County, he stayed there for some time. They did not travel together; they traveled separately, but they both hid out in this valley, and they were, probably had some drinks at the saloon, and lived it up there for a little while because they were surrounded by other sympathizers. But we know for a fact that they traveled through the San Bernardino Mountains before they made the rest of the trek. And what I want to share with you folks is something absolutely special. This is another unique Southern California story. The gentleman that we have here in this photograph is Clarence Edmund Bennett. In October of 1861, this retired Army officer, that's how he ended up in California. He was in the Army, and then he actually got discharged and was going to live a civilian life in 1859 or 1860. And when the war between the states and territories initially started, his idea was to kind of sit this one out. But sometimes, when the war happens in your backyard, you do not have that option. So by this point, the California Volunteers has already been recruiting for 6 months. He had no intention whatsoever of joining the federal army. He had already left the federal army after years of distinguished service, but he was deeply disturbed by the pro-Confederate paramilitary insurgent activity that were happening in his backyard. He lived in San Bernardino, but he also worked out of the mountains, being, I believe, a lawyer from that area. He had clients that were up there, and a lot of lawyers travel local circuits. So they wouldn't stay in one town. They would go to the different towns where the different customers were. And he joined a new militia company called the San Bernardino Rangers. They were pro-union militia, and he was elected as the company commander of this militia company. So this pro-union militia cavalry company was very active. They didn't just drill once a month at San Bernardino. They didn't just do parades and go to ballrooms, go to balls and parties dressed in their uniforms like so many other members of the California militia did in the pre-war area. They were actively involved in supporting the Union war effort. I would like to read to you a letter from the official records of the War of the Rebellion. This is a letter from December 10th of 1861, and it is from Captain Emil Fritz. He was of an officer, I believe, in the 1st California Cavalry, and he is addressing this to the commander of Camp Latham, which is in modern-day Culver City. So from San Bernardino area, you've got this junior officer writing to a more senior officer who's in Los Angeles. And the letter from Captain Fritz says, Colonel, I've just been informed by Mr. C.E. Bennett that there was a party of 75 or 80 men fitting out at the Monte. Now, El Monte in Los Angeles County was a huge pro-Confederate haven. So when this officer says the Monte, they're talking about the town of El Monte, El Monte. Mr. C.E. Bennett informs me that there is a party of 75 or 80 men fitting out at the Monte, and from here to attack Camp Wright in order to release Showalter and his party. They informed to attack the camp at night. Mr. Bennett tells me he received his information from a messenger who was sent here from the Monte to consult with secession parties here and raise money and arms. So there's a couple of jewels that we can glean from this one fragment of this letter. Number one, C.E. Bennett was active in communicating with the Federal Army. The letter is dated December 10th, so he is already captain of the San Bernardino Rangers. So this is concrete evidence of the California militia in San Bernardino interacting with the Union Army, the Federal Army in Southern California. Number two, we've got a group of men in the mountains of San Bernardino, a large group of men who are actively planning to attack Camp Wright in northern San Diego County to free Dan Showalter, the ex-assemblyman, and the other men in his party who were arrested. And then the other thing that we can glean from this, Mr. Bennett tells me he received his information from a messenger who was sent here from El Monte to consult with the secession parties. That means Bennett had at least one double agent among the ranks of the pro-Confederate insurgents. That is absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. So this militia company, they were not just sending letters to the Federal Army, they were out there gathering intel. They were riding up and down the mountains of Southern California. From a distance, they saw these guys having militia training, or they went into the saloons at Belleville and they just sat there having a beer, letting drunk guys talk about all the awesome stuff that they were doing with their friends with whom they were going to go fight for the South. Well, this created a very tense environment for Captain Bennett. We don't know too many details, but we know in April 1862 that he resigned his commission from the San Bernardino Rangers, and we do know that he cited the reason he needed to spend some time outside of San Bernardino immediately. Well, based on the primary sources we have, and also the knowledge that there was a pro-Confederate insurgency operating in the mountains of San Bernardino County, it doesn't take a genius to figure out these guys were likely privy to what Bennett and the San Bernardino Rangers were doing, and they were issuing threats to him. Just like a lot of other California militia officers received threats in some way, shape, or form by pro-Confederate insurgents, especially members of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Well, he disappears from San Bernardino County after resigning his commission, and then the San Bernardino Rangers unfortunately disbanded. But that is not the end of his story, because he returned to San Bernardino a year later as an officer in the 1st California Cavalry Regiment. So he never planned to go back to the Army, but because the war was happening in his backyard, he had to at a certain point, either that or stay in exile from his adopted home forever.